What's going on, guys? Shakeford Tech here, back with another video, and today we are revisiting my custom Xbox Series S / Xbox Series X controller that we modded not too long ago, but those were mostly cosmetic mods that we did, as we did new faceplate, a new button set, new thumbsticks. Today we're actually installing a rear button kit on this controller, and this particular kit is the Hope Programable Remap kit for Xbox Series X and S controllers from eXtremeRate. So this particular mod is exactly how it sounds. It is a button remap kit where you can take buttons from the front of the controller or the stock button set on the Xbox Series S and X controllers, and also program them to the buttons on the rear once this kit's installed. So in this video, we're going to do a step-by-step installation on this eXtremeRate kit and get this installed on the controller and get a few buttons programmed. Alrighty guys, starting off with this mod, we're going to focus on the rear aftermarket part of the shell. And first things first, we need to align the programmable button mapping switch onto the back of the shell. Once you have it aligned in the proper place, we're going to go ahead and take the PCB that has the buttons attached to it and get that mounted. There are 3 screw holes on this PCB, so make sure they're aligned with the ones on the shell. We're going to go ahead and mount it with those 3 screws. Also make sure that the switch on this PCB rests inside the switch faceplate cover that we just put in the shell. And for the screws, they are the smallest ones in the kit and they are Phillips head, so make sure you use those for this particular button PCB. Once that's mounted, you can make sure that the switch is working properly on the back side of the shell. Next, we are going to mount the buttons into the shell. This is done by 2 kind of tri-wing looking plastic plates that will be labeled K3, K4, and then for the other side K1 and K2. And these are not interchangeable, so they're designed to fit one side in particular. And before we mount them in, we are going to obviously attach the buttons to these. And the buttons just simply press in, and then you can flip them over and start mounting these plates. Once you have the buttons inserted inside the bracket, go ahead and mount each bracket with the 3 screws, and these will be the medium-sized Torx screws. Next, we're going to attach the rear button covers. These just simply snap on. Sometimes it's best to kind of angle it and they'll go on a little bit easier, opposed to just lining them up directly straight and pushing straight down. If you kind of angle them and press in, they should go on pretty easily. Since our aftermarket rear portion of the controller doesn't have battery terminals, we need to go ahead and remove the metal battery terminals out of the existing controller that we're using. This is pretty easily done. All you have to do is just get a tool from the inside of the controller back part of the shell, kind of lift up on each side, and then flip it back over and make sure the terminals are pushing through the slots, and it comes right out. Inserting it into the new controller grip is pretty easy. Just line it up with the same part of how you took it out and just push down and it snaps right in. Now that the new aftermarket controller grip is taken care of and prepped, we can turn our attention towards the actual controller portion that we disassembled. I had this one pre-disassembled before I started shooting this video, but I'll try and have some footage here of us quickly taking it apart. Pretty easy. Mainly you just have to remove the grips and remove the 5 T9 screws, T9 Torx screws that are holding the faceplate and the rear of the controller together. On the inside of a standard Xbox Series S/Series X controller, there are two PCBs, and we're going to need to remove the top PCB from the controller. This is most easily done by desoldering the wires that are found on the left and right side of this upper PCB. And just simply disconnecting the two circular terminal wires in the center of the board. Once all those wires are desoldered and the center terminal wires are unhooked, there are two Torx screws found on both the far left and on the far right side of this board. Once those are removed, this board comes right out. The headphone jack just is kind of wedged in freely between those two boards. And next, there are only two Torx screws on this particular board that we need to remove. We need to remove the center one and then the one on the lower left. And the reasoning is that our new PCB that we'll be adding on top of this board will be secured by those screws as well. Once this ribbon PCB is lined up and resecured with those screws, we need to go ahead and solder all the points. So there are quite a few points that you need to solder on this particular ribbon PCB. Majority of them will be on the left side of the PCB, and there's only 3 soldering points on the far right side. Make sure you have good contact between the soldering points, and it is kind of tough. Some of them are very close together, but try to make sure they're not making contact between each other and bridging the gap. And if you do have issues with your solder sticking, feel free to use a little bit of tacky flux as I did in this video. Once all the contact points are soldered on this board, go ahead and put back the headphone jack where we removed it from, and you are good to go ahead and mount the upper PCB that we removed earlier. You can go ahead and insert the 2 Torx screws that hold that PCB in, as we won't be needing to work on the lower PCB. The only instance where we might is if we have a bad solder connection on one of the points on the board. Next, we have a smaller ribbon PCB that we're going to need to solder to the upper PCB on our controller. Go ahead and line this up on the existing board, and the main points to kind of line it up with are some of the pre-soldered points on our controller board. Since this ribbon PCB isn't secured by any screws, it can be kind of tough to keep it aligned on the board. Feel free to use a piece of Kaftan tape as I did in this video. Once it's aligned and secured to your desire, we'll go ahead and solder the points. There's going to be 3 on the right side and 4 on the left side. Any of the points that you don't see that have a completely solid orange contact point for soldering, those are the ones you're going to go ahead and solder. But if you see some that are just kind of the translucent circle, those are just cutouts to fit over existing soldering points on this particular PCB. So for those, we don't need to apply any solder. Next, as we have a tag end coming from the lower ribbon PCB that we soldered earlier, we're going to go ahead and flip this on to the upper PCB that we just worked on. And this has a couple connection points on it. One is going to connect to the small ribbon PCB that we just soldered to the upper board. And it has another terminal that will later connect to the grip of our controller, but we will also use that connection point for our tester. Once this piece is flipped over on where it's visible on the upper PCB, go ahead and connect the small ribbon cable from the ribbon PCB we just soldered into the smaller ribbon cable connector on that board. Luckily, this kit does include a tester to make sure we have continuity between each soldering point that we soldered. So we're going to take the little green LED board that comes with the kit, attach the ribbon cable that they include, and connect this to the larger connector on the PCB we just flipped over. Next, go ahead and grab a USB Type-C cable connected to power, plug it into the controller, and we want to make sure that we have all red lights on our LED board to ensure that we have a solid connection between all of our soldering points. And in this case, our check looked good as all of the red LED lights were illuminated, and that means we have continuity between all of our soldering points. Next, you can go ahead and remove the tester, and you can actually remove the board that we just flipped over onto the upper PCB of our controller. There's two-sided tape on the back. You can remove that and more securely attach it to the upper PCB on our controller, but this is probably kind of an optional step. I just always wait till after we run the tester before I stick it to the board. Next, we are going to resolder the wires we disconnected to remove this upper PCB. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I will put some text on the screen. I definitely recommend taking a picture of this before you desolder them, but we're going to go through and I'll let you know which wires go where. So for the wires coming from the rumble motors, the black is going to go on the bottom contact point that says 504. And then above that, the red wire coming from the rumble motors is going to go in 503. Then for the wires that kind of come from the front of the controller, the solid black one is going to go on the 502 terminal, which is the lower one. Then the two-tone black and gray wire is going to go on the 501 contact point, which is the very top connection point. And this pattern of the wires goes for both sides. Next, reconnect the wires coming from the center to the upper PCB. The left one will go on the bottom, and then the right one will go on the top. Next, we are going to take the back portion of the controller that we worked on earlier and connect it to the connector that we ran our test kit in. Then carefully fold over the rear of the controller and make sure nothing's pinching in between. Once aligned, you can reattach your thumbsticks, put the faceplate back on the controller, then you can screw in the 5 Torx screws on the back of the controller and snap the grips back on and you're good to go. Now that we have our eXtremeRate button remap kit installed, it's time to program some of the buttons. So programming buttons on this kit is particularly easy, and it's all held in the memory of the controller. So go ahead and power on the controller with your Xbox turned on, or if you're using this on PC, make sure it's hooked up to your PC. And go ahead and flip the program switch on the back, and you will see a blue light illuminate. So one thing to note, when the program switch is turned on, the buttons on the rear of the controller are not active for actually use. So if you do program one and you test it right away without flipping that switch off, it won't work. So that's a little thing to keep in mind if you don't think it's working. So for the purposes of this video, in my particular playstyle, we are going to map the A button to K2 and we're going to map B to K1. So to do this, I'm going to ensure that the program button remap switch is on and I see the blue light. Then I'm basically just going to take and hold down the A button on the front of the controller and hold down K2 until I see that blue light flash 3 times. That will let me know that it's been programmed. Then I will do the same thing for K1. I'm going to hold down the B button on the front of the controller and hold down K1. Wait for the blue light to flash 3 times and we should be good to go. If you want to clear out the function on one of the buttons on the rear of the controller, you can do that by holding down that button when it's in the program mode, and it will flash red 3 times, and that will let you know that that button's been cleared out. Overall, it's a super simple setup, and I really like the way that it works with the controller. And the nice thing too about this button kit, it remaps and it doesn't cancel out the functions on these stock buttons. So I mapped A and B to some of the buttons on the rear of the controller, and they're still able to be used. They're not disabled and only mapped to the rear of the controller, which is a pretty nice feature. So that is going to close out this video, guys. Thank you for checking this one out. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you have picked up the Hope programmable remap kit from eXtremeRate, or if you're thinking about doing this mod yourself, you kind of have a pretty good idea of what's all involved as far as the mod goes. This mod is extremely intimidating from the looks of it, but it's really not that bad if you have a little bit of soldering experience. And even if not, if you follow the guides like this one or the one eXtremeRate has, it's pretty easy, and I was able to get it done with around an hour, and that includes all the film time as well, which takes up a lot of time when working on stuff like this. I do kind of want to revisit this mod and talk a little bit about the actual gameplay and performance of having buttons on the rear of the controller, as this is the first time I've ever had a controller with buttons and paddles on the rear. And in that video, we can also talk about a lot of the other options on the market when it comes to aftermarket controllers that have buttons and paddles on the back side of the controller. If you liked the video, make sure to leave a like, and if you want to see more tech related videos like this one, be sure to subscribe. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.